The sound of my grandmother's crying echoed through her empty kitchen like a prayer being answered by silence. I had come over to help her fix a leaky faucet, the same kitchen faucet she had been using to wash dishes and prepare meals for 3 generations of our family. But when I opened her cabinet to look for a wrench, I found something that stopped my heart cold. Shelves that should have been full of food, medicine, and the basic necessities of life were completely bare. Grandma Dorothy was sitting at her small kitchen table, the same table where she had fed countless family meals, homework sessions, and heart-to-heart conversations, staring at the empty cabinets like they contained the ruins of everything she had worked to build. In her hands was a single can of green beans, the last food in her entire house, and tears were falling down her cheeks like rain on drought-cracked earth. "Grandma," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "when was the last time you had a real meal?" She looked up at me with eyes that had seen too much struggle and carried too much pride to admit defeat easily. "Baby, don't you worry about me. I'm fine. These cabinets will be full again next month when my check comes." But I could see the lie in her trembling hands, in the way her clothes hung loose on a frame that had grown too thin, in the defeat that she was trying to hide behind the same strength that had carried our entire family through decades of challenges and celebrations. That's when I realized that the woman who had fed everyone else for 73 years was going hungry, that the person who had been our family's foundation was crumbling in silence, and that she would rather starve than let anyone know how desperate her situation had become. In that empty kitchen, watching my grandmother's tears fall where food should have been, I made a vow that would either restore her dignity or cost me everything trying. I was going to make sure Dorothy Williams never went hungry again. My name is Marcus Williams, and my grandmother was the strongest person I had ever known. At 73, Dorothy Williams had raised 6 children as a single mother, helped raise 14 grandchildren, and had been the central figure that kept our entire extended family connected through Sunday dinners, holiday celebrations, and the kind of unconditional love that made everyone feel like they belonged somewhere permanent. Grandma's house on Elm Street had been the gathering place for our family for as long as I could remember. Every Sunday after church, aunts and uncles and cousins would crowd into her small living room and kitchen, where she would somehow manage to feed 20 people with ingredients that seemed to multiply through her hands and her heart. She had worked for 45 years as a cafeteria worker in the public school system, serving lunch to thousands of children while raising her own family on wages that barely covered the basics. But she had always made it work, through careful budgeting, creative meal planning, and the kind of resourcefulness that could turn simple ingredients into feasts that felt like celebrations. Her kitchen was the heart of our family, filled with the smells of cornbread and collard greens, sweet potato pie and fried chicken, meals that were prepared with ingredients that cost almost nothing but tasted like love made edible. She could take a pot of beans and some cornbread and make it feel like a banquet because she understood that food was about more than nutrition. It was about gathering people together and making them feel cared for. When I was growing up, Grandma's house was my safe haven. After school, I would walk the 6 blocks from the bus stop to her front door, where she would have snacks waiting and homework help ready. She taught me to read using the Bible and the newspaper, showed me how to do math by helping her balance her checkbook, and explained history through the stories of what our family had survived and overcome. Education, she would tell me while I did homework at her kitchen table, is the one thing nobody can take away from you. Learn everything you can, because knowledge is power, and power is the only thing that can change your circumstances. She had dreams for me that extended far beyond what she had been able to achieve for herself. College, professional career, opportunities to use my mind instead of my back, chances to build something that would lift not just me, but our entire family into circumstances where struggle was choice rather than necessity. When I graduated from high school 3 months earlier, she had been in the front row crying tears of pride, telling everyone around her that her grandson was going to be the first in our family to attend university, the first to work in an office, the first to prove that hard work and education could break cycles of poverty that had defined our family for generations. But college required money we didn't have, and opportunities required connections we had never developed. I had been working part-time jobs since I was 16, saving every dollar I could for tuition and expenses, but the mathematics of higher education seemed designed to keep families like ours permanently excluded from paths to economic mobility. The plan was for me to attend community college in the fall, study business administration, and transfer to a 4-year university after completing my associate degree. It wasn't the prestigious education that some of my classmates were pursuing, but it was a realistic path forward that fit our family's financial constraints. But plans, I was learning, were only as stable as the people who made them. And I was about to discover that the person I had always counted on to be strong and stable was quietly falling apart while trying to protect everyone else from knowing how bad things had become. Have you ever watched the person who fed everyone else go hungry? When you realize that the strongest person in your family had been hiding their breaking point, rationing their own meals so they could continue providing for others, choosing dignity over survival because asking for help felt like admitting failure? That's where I found myself at 18. Standing in my grandmother's empty kitchen and understanding for the first time that strength can become a prison when it prevents people from accepting the help they desperately need. The financial reality that had led to Grandma's empty cabinets was brutal in its mathematical simplicity. Her Social Security check was $847 per month, an amount that had been calculated based on decades of wages that were barely above minimum wage when she was working. Her monthly expenses were straightforward but unforgiving. Rent of $425 for the small house she had been living in for 22 years, utilities that averaged $150 during summer months when air conditioning became a necessity rather than luxury, and medications that cost $180 per month even with Medicare coverage. That left approximately $90 per month for food, household supplies, clothing, transportation, and any unexpected expenses that might arise. It was an impossible arithmetic that forced her to choose between necessities, rotating which bills got paid each month and hoping that nothing would break or require replacement. The rent had been manageable when she first moved into the house in 2001, but landlords had increased it steadily over the years while her income remained essentially fixed. The utilities had become more expensive as the house aged and became less energy efficient. The medications had multiplied as her health challenges increased with age, and the costs had risen faster than her insurance coverage could keep pace. But the most devastating factor was inflation. The gradual increase in the cost of everything from groceries to gasoline that made her fixed income worth less every month. The $847 that had allowed for basic comfort 5 years earlier now forced choices between eating and staying warm, between medications and utilities, between dignity and survival. Grandma had been dealing with this impossible mathematics for over 2 years, gradually reducing her food budget to cover other necessities, eating smaller portions and fewer meals, and convincing herself that she was just not as hungry as she used to be. The math was simple and brutal, her dignity versus her survival, and she was choosing dignity even if it killed her. The pride that had sustained Grandma through decades of struggle was also preventing her from seeking help when she needed it most. She had spent 73 years being the person others turned to for support, advice, and assistance. The idea of reversing those roles and accepting help from family members felt like admitting defeat, like acknowledging that she had become a burden rather than a blessing. She had researched government assistance programs, but found the application processes humiliating and the benefits inadequate to address her actual needs. Food stamps might provide $150 per month in grocery assistance, but the eligibility requirements included asset limits that would force her to spend down her small savings account, the emergency fund she had built over decades of careful budgeting. The senior assistance programs in our community had waiting lists measured in months rather than weeks, and most provided only limited help with utility bills or transportation rather than comprehensive support for people whose fixed incomes had become inadequate for basic survival. Family members had offered help in various ways, but accepting assistance felt like admitting that she could no longer take care of herself, that the strength and independence she had maintained throughout her adult life had finally reached its limits. "I raised 6 children without asking anyone for help," she had told me during previous conversations about her finances. "I'm not going to start being a burden to my family now that I'm old." But independence becomes meaningless when it leads to hunger, and pride becomes dangerous when it prevents survival. What I discovered that day in her kitchen was that the woman who had fed our entire family for decades was quietly starving rather than asking for the help she had always provided to others. The weight of family history made Grandma's current situation even more heartbreaking. This was the same woman who had somehow managed to feed 6 children during the 1970s and 1980s when jobs were scarce and wages were low for Black families in our community. She had stretched government commodities and food stamps into meals that felt abundant, had grown vegetables in her backyard, and had developed the kind of resourcefulness that could create something from nothing. During my childhood, her house had been the place where hungry people were always welcome. Neighborhood children knew they could get a meal at Grandma Dorothy's house if their own families were struggling. Relatives going through difficult times could count on her for food, temporary housing, and the kind of emotional support that helped people believe that their current circumstances were temporary rather than permanent. She had been our family's emergency fund when formal financial institutions wouldn't serve our community. Family members facing eviction, medical bills, or unexpected expenses could borrow money from Grandma's carefully managed savings, usually without formal repayment schedules, because she understood that helping family was more important than earning interest. Holiday celebrations at her house had been legendary in our community. Thanksgiving dinners that fed 30 people, Christmas mornings where every child received gifts even when money was tight, Easter celebrations that included elaborate egg hunts and meals that felt like banquets. The kitchen where I found her crying had been the site of countless cooking lessons, where she taught daughters and granddaughters how to prepare traditional family recipes, how to stretch budgets without sacrificing nutrition, and how to turn meal preparation into expressions of love rather than merely feeding hunger. But now that same kitchen was empty, its cabinets bare, its refrigerator containing only condiments and a few leftovers that couldn't constitute a meal. The woman who had been everyone's provider had become someone who needed providing for, and her pride was preventing her from accepting the help she had always given to others. The discovery of her situation wasn't accidental. It was the result of 3 months of small signs that I had been too young and too distracted by my own future plans to recognize. She had been losing weight gradually, but I had attributed it to normal aging rather than insufficient nutrition. She'd been declining family dinner invitations, claiming she wasn't very hungry lately, rather than admitting she couldn't afford to contribute food to gatherings where everyone was expected to bring something. The medications she was supposed to take daily had been rationed to every other day to make them last longer, a decision that was affecting her health in ways that would eventually require emergency medical care that would cost far more than the prescription she was trying to avoid purchasing. The utilities in her house had been reduced to bare minimums. No air conditioning during summer heat waves, minimal heating during winter months, limited use of lights and appliances to keep electric bills as low as possible. That night, I realized I wasn't just her grandson anymore. I was the only person standing between her and starvation. The conversation we had after I discovered her empty cabinets was unlike any conversation we had ever shared. For the first time in my 18 years, I saw my grandmother not as the strong family matriarch who had solutions for everyone's problems, but as a vulnerable elderly woman who was too proud to admit she was drowning. "Grandma," I said, sitting beside her at the kitchen table where she had helped me with homework for years. "How long have you been going without meals?" She tried to maintain the facade of strength that had protected our family from worry for decades. "Baby, I'm fine. Sometimes old people just don't eat as much as they used to." "Grandma, please don't lie to me. I can see that you've lost weight. I can see that there's no food in this house. I can see that you're in trouble, and I need you to tell me the truth about what's been happening." That's when the walls she had built around her pride finally cracked, and she told me everything. The impossible choices between rent and groceries, medications and utilities, dignity and survival. The nights when she had gone to bed hungry rather than ask family members for help. The mornings when she had pretended to eat breakfast while actually drinking water to suppress hunger until she could figure out how to afford food. "I never wanted you to know," she whispered, tears falling onto the empty table where so many family meals had been shared. "I never wanted anyone to see me like this." "Grandma," I said, taking her hands in mine, "you spent 18 years taking care of me. Now it's my turn to take care of you." She shook her head. "Baby, you're 18 years old. You can't solve problems this big. You need to focus on college and building your own future." "My future doesn't mean anything if it doesn't include making sure you're safe and fed and taken care of," I said. "You taught me that family takes care of family. Now let me prove that I learned that lesson." That night, staring at the ceiling in my bedroom while thinking about Grandma's empty cabinets, I realized that college could wait, but my grandmother's hunger couldn't. I had to choose between being a normal teenager and being the man my grandmother had raised me to become. The choice was easier than I had expected it to be. The next morning, I started researching every possible way to generate income quickly and sustainably. Not teenage part-time work that might earn a few $100s per month, but legitimate business opportunities that could create enough income to cover Grandma's expenses while building something that could support both of us long-term. What I discovered was that the skills I had developed throughout high school, website design, social media management, basic graphic design, were exactly what small businesses in our community needed, but couldn't afford from traditional marketing agencies. Most local businesses understood that they needed online presence to compete, but they couldn't afford the $3,000, $5,000 monthly fees that established marketing companies charged for comprehensive services. They needed someone who could provide professional results at affordable prices, someone who understood both technology and the realities of small business budgets. I started by offering free website consultations to businesses I had noticed during my part-time work, identifying specific problems with their online presence and proposing solutions that would drive measurable increases in customer engagement and sales. The first business owner who agreed to hire me was Mrs. Patterson, who owned a small hair salon that was struggling to compete with chain franchises and newer establishments that had better marketing. Her current website looked outdated, she had no social media strategy, and most potential customers didn't even know her business existed. "Marcus," she said after reviewing my proposal, "you're asking me to pay $800 for a complete website redesign and social media setup, but you're 18 years old with no professional experience. How do I know you can deliver what you're promising?" "Because," I said, "I guarantee that your online appointment bookings will increase by at least 100% within 30 days, or I'll refund every penny and continue working on your project for free until you're completely satisfied." The guarantee was risky. If I failed to deliver results, I would lose time and money while potentially damaging my reputation before my business even got started. But it was also the only way to overcome the natural skepticism that business owners felt about hiring someone my age for substantial projects. Mrs. Patterson agreed to the project, partly because the guarantee eliminated her financial risk, but mostly because she was desperate enough to try something different, and my enthusiasm convinced her that I would work harder than established competitors. I found the path forward, but walking it would require sacrificing everything I thought my future would be. The work on Mrs. Patterson's salon website became my crash course in professional service delivery under pressure. I spent 12 hours per day for 2 weeks learning new skills, troubleshooting technical problems, and discovering that the difference between amateur and professional work was attention to details that customers might never notice, but which determined whether marketing efforts succeeded or failed. The website I created wasn't just visually appealing. It was optimized for local search results, integrated with online booking systems, and designed to convert visitors into customers through carefully crafted content and strategic placement of calls to action. The social media strategy included before and after photos of clients, styling tips that positioned Mrs. Patterson as an expert, and targeted advertising that reached women in our community who were actively looking for hair care services. But the most important element was measurement and follow-through. I tracked every aspect of the website's performance, monitored social media engagement, and continuously adjusted strategies based on real-world results rather than theoretical best practices. When Mrs. Patterson's appointment bookings increased by 187% in the first month, word spread quickly through the local business community. Salon owners started recommending me to restaurant managers, retail store owners began calling about their own marketing needs, and service providers started asking about the young man who was apparently helping businesses dramatically increase their customer base. Within 2 months, I had 8 active clients paying between $500 and $2,200 per month for various combinations of website management, social media marketing, and online advertising services. More importantly, I was generating enough monthly income to cover Grandma's expenses while building a client base that created sustainable long-term revenue. But the real breakthrough came when I met David Chen, who owned a small restaurant that had been struggling since the pandemic forced most dining to shift online. His business needed a complete digital transformation: online ordering system, delivery integration, social media presence, and customer retention programs. "Marcus," he said during our initial consultation, I've lost 40% of my customers over the past 2 years because I couldn't adapt to how people order food now. I need someone who can completely rebuild how my business operates online. The project he was proposing would require me to learn new technologies, integrate complex systems, and basically rebuild his entire business model around digital rather than in-person customer service. The fee we discussed was $2,500, enough to cover Grandma's expenses for 3 months. "Why should I trust someone your age with something this important to my business?" he asked. I thought about Grandma's empty cabinets, about the promise I had made to fill them again, about the responsibility I felt to prove that love could be translated into action. "Because," I said, "this isn't just about business for me. My grandmother is going hungry while I figure out how to earn enough money to take care of her. Your restaurant's success is directly connected to my family's survival. That means I'm going to work harder and care more than any consultant you could hire." David was moved by my honesty and impressed by my guarantee of measurable results. He signed the contract, giving me the opportunity to prove that desperate motivation could produce professional outcomes. Every door that closed taught me something about which doors I needed to build myself. The restaurant project became the foundation for everything that followed. Over the next month, I learned more about e-commerce integration, customer relationship management, and digital marketing analytics than I could have learned in a full semester of college courses. David's restaurant needed more than just a website. It needed a complete digital ecosystem that could handle online ordering, manage customer data, coordinate delivery logistics, and maintain engagement with customers who were no longer visiting the physical location regularly. I developed an integrated system that connected his website to major food delivery platforms, created a customer loyalty program that encouraged repeat orders, and implemented automated marketing campaigns that reminded customers about special offers and new menu items. But the most innovative element was a community engagement strategy that positioned the restaurant as a local gathering place even when people couldn't gather there physically. Virtual cooking classes where David taught customers how to prepare signature dishes at home. Online events that brought together regular customers who missed the social aspects of dining out. Social media content that celebrated the neighborhood and created emotional connections beyond just food transactions. When David's online sales increased by 340% in the first quarter, and his customer retention rates improved dramatically, he became my most enthusiastic advocate and my introduction to business owners throughout the region. "What Marcus accomplished for my restaurant," he told other business owners, "was prove that innovation matters more than experience, that caring about results matters more than having credentials, and that sometimes the best solutions come from people who have everything to lose if they fail." Within 6 months of starting my business, I was managing digital marketing for over 15 local businesses, had developed specialized expertise in restaurant and retail marketing, and was generating monthly income that exceeded what most adults earned in traditional careers. This wasn't just about making money, it was about proving that love could be translated into groceries. The first time I was able to fill Grandma's cabinets completely was a Tuesday evening in October, exactly 4 months after finding her crying over empty shelves. I had just received payment from 3 clients, giving me enough money to cover her monthly expenses with extra left over for a substantial grocery shopping trip. I picked her up without telling her where we were going, just saying that I needed help selecting groceries for a project I was working on. When we arrived at the supermarket, I handed her a shopping cart and told her to pick out everything she needed for the next month. "Baby, this is too much," she said, as we filled the cart with fresh vegetables, high-quality proteins, the ingredients for meals she hadn't been able to afford in over a year. "You can't spend this much money on groceries." "Grandma," I said, "this isn't spending money. This is investing in the person who invested in me for 18 years. You taught me that food is love made edible. Now let me show you what your love taught me to build." At the checkout counter, watching the total climb higher than she had spent on groceries in months, she started crying again. But this time, the tears were different. Not the broken sobs of desperation, but the overwhelming tears of gratitude and disbelief. "How is this possible?" she asked, as we loaded bag after bag into my car. "How are you able to afford all this?" I explained the business I had built, the clients I was serving, the skills I had developed, and the income I was generating through providing valuable services to local businesses that needed help adapting to an increasingly digital economy. "But what about college?" she asked. What about your education and your future? This is my education, I said. I'm learning more about business, technology, customer service, and problem solving than any classroom could teach me. And I'm building something that will provide security for both of us, while proving that the values you taught me can create real-world results. When we got back to her house and filled every cabinet, every shelf, every inch of storage space with food and supplies, Grandma sat at her kitchen table and looked around like she was seeing a miracle. "I never thought these cabinets would be full again," she whispered. "They're never going to be empty again," I promised. I wasn't just earning money, I was earning the right to fill my grandmother's cabinets again. What would you sacrifice to restore your grandmother's dignity? When does a grandson become responsible for the woman who raised the family? Have you ever had to choose between following the expected path and creating the path that leads where your family actually needs you to go? These weren't abstract questions anymore. They were the realities I had lived through, the choices I had made, and the lessons I carried forward into a completely different understanding of what success actually meant. The transformation of Grandma's life over the following year was more dramatic than either of us had imagined possible. Within 12 months, I was generating enough income to cover all her monthly expenses while building a savings account that could handle emergencies and unexpected costs. But the most meaningful changes weren't financial. They were the changes in how she understood her place in our family and her community. For the first time in over 2 years, Grandma was able to resume hosting Sunday dinners for our extended family. Her kitchen became the gathering place again, filled with the sounds of multiple conversations, the smells of traditional recipes, and the energy that comes when people feel welcome and well-fed. She started volunteering at our church's food pantry, using her experience with hunger to help other elderly community members who were facing similar challenges with fixed incomes and rising costs. Her combination of practical knowledge and genuine empathy made her invaluable for connecting people with resources they needed while maintaining their dignity. Most importantly, she learned to accept help and support from the grandson she had raised to be independent. Our roles had shifted in ways that felt natural rather than forced. She was still my grandmother and mentor, but I was also her partner in ensuring that her golden years included the security and comfort she had earned through decades of service to our family. The business continued to grow beyond what either of us had imagined possible. By the end of my first year, I had 23 active clients, had hired 2 part-time assistants, and was generating monthly income that provided financial security for both Grandma and myself while creating opportunities for continued expansion. But the achievement I was most proud of wasn't business growth. It was the community program I had developed to help other elderly residents who were facing similar challenges with fixed incomes and rising living costs. The program connected seniors who needed assistance with young entrepreneurs who could provide services while building their own businesses. Technology training, home maintenance, grocery shopping, medication management, services that improved quality of life for elderly community members while creating income opportunities for young people who were willing to work. This program, I told the local newspaper when they featured our story, exists because I learned that empty cabinets aren't just about food. They're about dignity, independence, and the feeling that you matter to someone. No one should have to choose between eating and paying rent, especially people who spent their lives taking care of others. The empty cabinets became full again, but more importantly, her spirit was restored. 2 years after finding Grandma crying in her empty kitchen, I was invited to speak at the regional conference of the National Association for Senior Services about intergenerational solutions to elder poverty. Standing at that podium, looking out at an audience of social workers, policymakers, and community advocates, I thought about the journey that had brought us from empty cabinets to food security, from crisis to community leadership. 2 years ago, I began, I found my grandmother crying over empty kitchen cabinets, and I realized that all the strength she had shown our family for 7 decades was actually courage disguised as necessity. She was going hungry rather than asking for help, because she had spent so long being the person others turned to that she didn't know how to reverse those roles. I talked about the importance of recognizing that elder poverty wasn't just about money. It was about dignity, independence, and the feeling that society valued the contributions older adults had made throughout their lives. The most effective solutions, I continued, aren't government programs or charitable organizations, though those serve important functions. The most effective solutions are intergenerational partnerships, where young people use their energy and skills to solve problems, while older adults provide wisdom and guidance based on decades of experience. I outlined strategies for creating community-based programs that connected elders who needed assistance with young people who could provide services while building their own careers and businesses, emphasizing the importance of mutual benefit rather than one-way charity. Success, I concluded, isn't about young people helping old people or old people teaching young people. Success is about understanding that we're stronger together than any of us could be alone, and that the best inheritance we can give each other is proof that every generation has something valuable to offer the generations that come before and after. The presentation ended with a standing ovation, but the moment that mattered most came afterward, when an elderly woman approached me with tears in her eyes. "My grandson is 19, she said. "He's been struggling to find direction since graduating high school, and I've been struggling to manage my expenses since my husband died. After hearing your speech, I think we might be able to help each other." I gave her my contact information and offered to connect her with resources for developing intergenerational business partnerships. "The most important thing," I told her, "is understanding that needing help isn't a sign of weakness, and providing help isn't a burden. Sometimes the best thing you can do for someone you love is let them prove how much they love you back." 3 years after discovering Grandma's empty cabinets, I was preparing to start my sophomore year at State University, having deferred enrollment to build our business, but finally ready to combine formal education with real-world experience. The business was stable enough to support both Grandma and my educational expenses, and I had decided that the best way to serve our community was to develop additional skills in business administration and social entrepreneurship. But the most meaningful achievement wasn't business success or educational plans. It was the relationship between a grandmother and grandson who had learned that the strongest families are built not on avoiding problems, but on solving problems together. On the 3rd anniversary of that day, when I found her crying over empty cabinets, Grandma and I celebrated by hosting a community dinner for 60 people, other seniors and young adults who had been connected through our intergenerational partnership program. Her kitchen, which had once been empty, was now the center of a gathering that proved food wasn't just about nutrition. It was about connection, dignity, and the knowledge that everyone deserved to feel valued and cared for. During the dinner, Grandma gave a speech that brought tears to everyone's eyes, but especially to mine. 3 years ago, she said, standing in the kitchen that had once held only empty cabinets, I thought my useful days were over. I thought being old meant being invisible, being poor meant being powerless, and needing help meant being a burden. She looked directly at me. What my grandson taught me is that the most important inheritance I could give him wasn't money or property. It was the knowledge that love requires action, that family means taking care of each other regardless of age or circumstances, and that the greatest honor you can give someone is letting them prove how much they value what you've given them. The applause was generous, but what meant the most to me was the conversation Grandma and I had later that evening, sitting at her kitchen table, the same table where she had cried over empty cabinets, where she had helped me with homework, where we had planned the business that changed both our lives. "Do you ever regret not going to college right after high school?" she asked. "Do you wonder what would have happened if you had followed the traditional path instead of choosing to take care of me?" I thought about that alternate timeline for a moment. 4 years of college while Grandma continued struggling with hunger and poverty, graduating with credentials but no real understanding of how to solve problems that mattered to people I loved. "I think," I said finally, "I would have learned a lot about theories of success, but I never would have discovered what it actually feels like to transform someone else's life through your own actions. I never would have understood that the most valuable education comes from being responsible for results that matter to people who matter to you." Grandma nodded. "What you built didn't just fill my cabinets. It filled my heart with pride in the man you became when your family needed you most. What's the most important thing you want me to remember as I continue building our business and pursuing my education?" I asked. Grandma smiled. "That empty cabinets aren't just about food. They're about dignity, hope, and the feeling that someone cares whether you have what you need to survive. And that full cabinets aren't just about abundance. They're about love made practical, family made real, and promises kept when keeping them required becoming someone you never thought you could be." 4 years after finding Grandma crying over empty cabinets, I graduated from State University with a degree in business administration and social entrepreneurship, having completed my education while continuing to run the business that supported both our family and our community programs. But the moment that brought everything full circle came during my graduation ceremony, when Grandma stood up in the audience, healthier, happier, and more secure than she had been in years, and cheered loud enough for everyone to hear when my name was called. After the ceremony, we celebrated at her house with a family dinner that fed 37 people. The same kitchen that had once contained only empty cabinets was now overflowing with food, laughter, and the knowledge that love could be translated into action, that promises could be kept through determination, and that the greatest honor you could give the people who fed your family was making sure they never went hungry again. The business had grown into a regional consulting firm that specialized in digital marketing for small businesses and community development programs. We employed 12 people, served clients in 4 states, and had helped launch 17 other intergenerational partnership programs in communities facing similar challenges with elder poverty and youth unemployment. But the achievement I was most proud of wasn't business expansion or academic success. It was the knowledge that I had found a way to honor the woman who had fed our family for generations by ensuring that her golden years included the security, dignity, and abundance she had earned through decades of service to others. 5 years after that day when everything changed, I was invited to testify before a state legislative committee about innovative approaches to addressing elder poverty and creating economic opportunities for young entrepreneurs. Sitting at that witness table, representing not just my own family's transformation, but the transformation of every family whose crisis had become catalyst for community development, I felt the weight of responsibility that comes with unexpected opportunities to influence policy. "Representatives," I began, 5 years ago, I found my grandmother crying over empty kitchen cabinets, and I realized that the woman who had fed our entire family for 7 decades was going hungry because her fixed income couldn't keep pace with the rising cost of basic necessities. I presented research about the economic impact of elder poverty, statistics about the correlation between food insecurity and health outcomes for seniors, and policy recommendations for creating programs that addressed root causes rather than just providing temporary assistance. The most important lesson we learned, I explained, is that the people facing crisis often have family members who are motivated to create solutions, and that communities become stronger when they provide opportunities for mutual support rather than one-way charity. I outlined proposals for state funding to support intergenerational entrepreneurship programs, tax incentives for businesses that hired young people while serving elderly community members, and partnerships between educational institutions and senior service organizations to create pathways for students to develop careers while addressing community needs. Economic development isn't about attracting outside companies to create jobs, I concluded. It's about empowering local families to create their own opportunities, to solve their own problems, and to prove that every community has untapped potential that can be activated by the right combination of crisis and love. After the hearing, several representatives approached me with questions about implementing similar programs in their districts. Others asked about the policy changes that could make intergenerational entrepreneurship more accessible to families facing economic challenges. But the conversation that meant the most came from a committee staff member who pulled me aside after the formal proceedings ended. "My grandmother is 91 and living on Social Security," she said quietly. "She's too proud to ask for help, but I can see that she's struggling. After hearing your testimony, I think there might be ways for our family to work together that I hadn't considered." I gave her my contact information and offered to connect her with resources for developing family-based solutions to elder care challenges. "The most important thing," I told her, "is understanding that taking care of each other isn't about age or obligation, it's about love. And love finds ways to become practical when people you care about need you to translate caring into action." That conversation reminded me that our family's story had never been just about us. It had been about proving that transformation was possible, that empty cabinets could become full again, and that the people who witnessed your grandmother's hunger could become the people who celebrated her abundance. 6 years after watching Grandma cry over empty cabinets, I was invited to give the commencement address at the local community college. Standing at that podium, looking out at graduates who represented every age and background, I thought about the journey that had brought our family from food insecurity to community leadership, from crisis to celebration. 6 years ago, I told them, I was 18 years old with plans for college and dreams of building a successful career. What I discovered was that success isn't about achieving your own dreams. It's about using your achievements to ensure that the people who made your dreams possible can live with dignity, security, and the knowledge that their sacrifices created someone willing to sacrifice for them. I talked about the importance of recognizing when the people you love are suffering in silence, about understanding that strength can become a barrier to receiving help, and about developing the courage to change your own plans when your family's needs require immediate action rather than long-term preparation. Some of you have grandparents or elderly relatives who are facing challenges with fixed incomes and rising costs, I continued. Some of you have family members who are too proud to ask for help but desperately need assistance. Some of you are wondering whether your education and career plans should take priority over immediate family responsibilities. I looked out at faces that represented the same hopes and challenges I had faced at 18, knowing that some of them were carrying responsibilities that society told them were too mature for their age, too complex for their experience. What I want you to understand, I concluded, is that the greatest honor you can give the people who fed your family is making sure they never go hungry again. That empty cabinets aren't just about food, they're about dignity, hope, and the feeling that someone cares whether you have what you need to survive. And that sometimes the most important education you can receive is learning how to transform love into action when the people who love you most need you to prove how much their love means to you. The applause was generous, but the moment that mattered most came afterward, when a graduate named Sarah approached me with her grandmother, both of them with tears in their eyes. "This is my grandson," her grandmother said. "He's been working part-time to help with my expenses since he was 16, but he was going to quit college to work full-time because I can't afford my medications. After hearing your speech, we think there might be another way." I looked at Sarah and saw myself 6 years earlier, young, determined, caught between family loyalty and personal dreams, convinced that love required choosing between his own future and his grandmother's present. "There's always another way," I told him. "The question is whether you're ready to build it together. If you believe that the greatest honor you can give the person who fed your family is making sure they never go hungry again, that empty cabinets are symbols of broken systems and full cabinets are symbols of restored dignity, and that the most important inheritance we can give each other is proof that love can be translated into action, then this story matters to you too. Subscribe for more stories about young people who chose family over fear, action over assumption, and love over limitation when faced with the choice between following expected paths and creating paths that lead where their families actually needed them to go. About grandchildren who learned that the greatest gift they could give their elders wasn't protection from struggle, but partnership in transforming struggle into strength. Because that day, finding Grandma crying over empty cabinets taught me something no classroom ever could. That some tears are too heartbreaking to ignore, some people are too precious to let suffer, and some promises are too sacred to break, even when keeping them requires becoming someone you never imagined you could be. Hit that subscribe button if you believe that empty cabinets can become full again, that dignity can be restored through determination, and that sometimes the most important lesson you can learn is that taking care of the people who took care of you isn't a burden. It's a privilege that proves their investment in your character created someone worthy of their sacrifice. Because sometimes the greatest honor you can give the person who fed your family is making sure they never go hungry again. And sometimes the most beautiful sound in the world isn't laughter or celebration. It's the absence of tears when someone you love opens cabinets that are full instead of empty, knowing that they're safe, valued, and cared for by the people whose lives they made possible through decades of love made practical, one meal at a time.